Happy coding.
Hey there, happy coders. Welcome to the video. Today, for me, it is a Saturday afternoon. It is very wintry here. I moved here a little while ago, and this is our first big winter storm. So the lights have been flickering, and it's freezing cold outside, and there's ice and snow and all these things. Um, but here I am, gonna put together a little video for you. Um, so today's going to be a little different than what I normally do. Normally, I sit down with a goal and I code it up, and it's kind of fun for me at least, and hopefully fun for you as well. Um, but today I'm going to experiment with ChatGPT and Bard. Um, I have so many mixed feelings about these tools. These are large language models that the tech industry has become obsessed with. I wrote a blog a while ago about some of my initial thoughts on it. That was more than a year ago, and since then I've learned a lot more. I've thought more about it, and I still have really mixed feelings. On one hand, these tools are really interesting, and I think some of the I don't know, concepts that they suggest in terms of like the meaning of language is really interesting. On the other hand, they are built on stolen work, on copyrighted work, and they can be used for really evil things. So I don't know. I don't know how to feel. So in my personal life, I've tended to just kind of stay away from them. But relatively recently, my job actually is to understand them better. I'm starting this new role where I'm teaching more about like ML and ML tools. Again, mixed feelings about that to start with, but um, because of that, I'm going to try to sort of force myself to use these tools, to think about these tools, to understand their pros and their cons. So that's what this video is about. I sat down with this goal and I figured, you know what, why not record it? So this is not going to be a video where I sort of clickbaity tell you that, oh my God, ChatGPT is the way of the future. And if you don't use it, you're falling behind. That's not my attitude. On the other hand, I'm also not going to say doom and gloom. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to us, because I do think that probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. Um, so anyway, that's enough preamble. In fact, that's way too much preamble. It's more preamble than I normally do. So without further rambling from me, I'll say that the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to take a project that I just created. I did this a couple days ago for Genuary, which is this event that gives you a prompt and then you create some kind of generative art project from it. So if that sounds interesting, you can go check that out. That's my previous video, or you can go here to happycoding.io to see the like my process and the code and stuff. But it's this project that is written in P5 that creates these kind of randomly drawn squares. So you can see the code here. It's not super long. It's around 70 lines of code. I think the end result was maybe a little longer. Yeah, 75-ish. I think I added a couple lines just for, some tiny changes. I should probably update that, but whatever. And the end result is I hit run. And I don't know why this code is slow, but when it does run, you'll get these randomly colored squares. And this is this is a known issue in P5, so I'm going to ignore that. But here it is, or there it is, up there. It's a piece of code that I wrote myself a couple days ago, and it's not rocket surgery really, but it does have a couple of techniques in it that I sort of came up with on the fly, or used from my previous experience. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that same goal, which was to create a project in the style of Vera Molnar. So Vera Molnar is this early digital artist that created, digital art that was, pretty interesting and kind of holds up to, my, I don't know, modern eye or whatever you want to call it. So lots of different examples of Vera Molnar's art, and the goal was to create something that sort of resembled that. This is, I think, my favorite that I saw towards the end of my investigation, but lots of stuff involving shapes and sort of randomness and stuff. So really interesting to play with. And my goal is to take that same my goal is to take that goal and feed that into ChatGPT, feed that into Bard, and see what happens. Okay. So yeah, I haven't really thought about it beyond that. So let's see. I'm going to start with, I don't know, ChatGPT, and there are a few ways I can approach this. So I could feed in like the direct prompt, it would be called, and say, give me a P5 sketch that is in the style of Vera Molnar, and just see what happens. But just to sort of familiarize ourselves with like what to expect from ChatGPT, I'm going to start with maybe something like, give me an example p5.js sketch, and hit enter and just see what it gives me. So ChatGPT has been trained on lots of things, including my own website, which again, I have really mixed feelings about. But because of that, it can sort of give you these reasonable looking pieces of code. So it looks like this is just kind of at a glance, it's giving me like a sketch that shows a bouncing ball. So let me copy this code, and I'm going to copy it into a new P5 sketch. So this will be kind of my scratch space. So I'm just going to hit paste and see what happens. So let me run this. And yeah, you know, that's fine. I think that is a P5 sketch. It works. It doesn't have errors. This error is annoying, but it's internal to P5, so I'm going to ignore it. And it's, you know, fine. It's even got like comments and stuff, so you can start to see that and be like, oh wow, ChatGPT can write code. Oh, it's going to come for all of our jobs. But you know, let's see how we feel after we start giving it other stuff. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how we'll feel. It could be that it continues blowing us away, or it could be that we eventually hit a limit. I honestly don't know. So let's compare that to Bard. So I've used ChatGPT a little tiny bit for a couple of things here and there, mostly for teaching stuff when I want it to come up with like a bunch of examples, for example. That's how I've used it. But Bard, I haven't really used outside of my work, which, you know, since I work for Google, we use Google stuff. So this is Google's LLM, basically. So let me just do the same prompt. Give me an example p5.js sketch. Let's just see what it does. And here we go. Here's an example p5.js sketch that demonstrates interactive drawing. Okay, so let's see. We've got a function setup, and, you know, I'm kind of squinting at this, and some of it's a little weird. It's got like function setup up here and then declares variables. You know, stylistically, that's probably not what I would expect from a human. It's also got is drawing true, is drawing false. You know, just logically thinking about this, you don't need to do this because you have the like mouse is pressed variable. Looks like that's all this is doing. So I think most of this code ends up being unnecessary. And you know, I don't know how preachy I'm going to get, but I will say that I do think this is one of the, I don't want to say dangers of LLMs, but like coding with LLMs, just kind of glancing at it, I think this code will work. So maybe I should have started there. So let me copy this code and paste it in. Hit run and see what happens. My guess is that if I click around, it'll draw a line, right? Yeah, okay. So that is a reasonable start. And sure, if I kind of squint at it, I think this code is okay. I do think there are a couple of things that like I would have done differently, or I think maybe a more seasoned coder would do differently. So, you know, I would have stored, actually you can get away with getting rid of all of these variables now that I'm looking at it. And a lot of this, this logic. So it's pros and cons. The way I look at it is pros and cons. Also, my computer is dying because it really doesn't like having these tabs open. It's funny. So yeah, just to sort of, I don't know, explain that, you know, just glancing at this code, it's got an X and a Y variable. It's got an is drawing variable, and then it sets those variables depending on whether you click the mouse or not, and then uses those variables in the mouse dragged function. My sort of, I don't know, human instinct is that you can get rid of all this stuff. And I think you can even get rid of all this stuff and this stuff because, P5 has this kind of functionality built in. So like is mouse pressed instead of tracking it myself. And I think I can do prev mouse X or p mouse X. Let me open up the P5 reference. So p5js.org. And I'm pretty sure there's like a p mouse X. Yeah. P mouse X, p mouse Y. So it like tracks the previous value, which I believe is what their previous code was doing. So p mouse Y, mouse X, mouse Y. And then I don't need this either. So I'm guessing that in, much shorter code, I can do the exact same thing that Bard was trying to do. And it's not is mouse pressed. It's what? Oh, it's mouse is pressed. That's right. So mouse is pressed. So I can run this. And now do I get, yeah. So now I get the same exact thing, but in much fewer lines of code. So, pros and cons to what Bard or ChatGPT gives you. And I think that's an important piece that a lot of folks tend to gloss over is you do still need to understand the code, and the code will often be, not optimal or not as readable or just, different than what a human would do. So, use code with caution, they say, but, you got to think about it. So, not to maybe be too unfair with Bard, I'm guessing that I could probably prompt it to get rid of those. So let's see. So if I say something like use p mouse X and p mouse Y instead of tracking X and Y yourself. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Let's see if it's smart enough to deal with my typo. Ooh, Bard's really thinking. All right, here's an updated sketch using p mouse X and p mouse Y. And yeah, exactly. This is pretty much exactly the code that I came up with. So I'm using p mouse X, p mouse Y, mouse X, and mouse Y instead of tracking it myself, or, this is what Bard is doing. So, in this kind of small example, Bard is able to come up with something that I would, kind of expect. However, I needed to watch it really carefully in order to like double check, like, hey, does this code make sense? Because if I had just copy pasted the original code, it would have worked. And if I just like copied the code, checked if it worked, and said good enough, I wouldn't have thought, critically about like, do I really need all these variables? And so that's just a small example. And as the examples get bigger, that same problem comes back over and over again. In fact, every single time that you use it, you do have to kind of think about it more carefully. So I don't know. That's an intro to the kinds of things you can do, and maybe the kinds of considerations that you should still have. And let's see. So back into ChatGPT, another thing you can do is, you can get a little bit more advanced than that. So here I just said, give me an example p5.js sketch. Instead, I could say something like, give me a p5.js sketch that draws a, I don't know. It's, I wish I had an audience here to ask for a random noun or something, but it's wintry outside. So I'm going to say like snowflake. Give me a p5.js sketch that draws a snowflake. And let's see what it does. So this is a little more involved, and I'm going to copy this into my handy Scratch sketch over here and run this. Just taking a look at it, let's see. So it's got a background that's going to be like light gray. It actually, the comment says, I've got a circle and then some lines, and that's using a for loop that uses some trigonometry to like draw maybe like, I would expect this to look kind of like a wagon wheel kind of thing, but let's run it and see what happens. And okay, there you go. It's kind of a snowflake. I can kind of guess at how it got to that not logically. I don't want to pretend that ChatGPT or Bard are like following logic, but I can understand how in the training data that it was trained on, it has seen things like drawing lines or drawing circles associated with the word snowflake. I could probably imagine that. I could also go back and forth with ChatGPT and say something like, make it more blue and jagged. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to do with that, but let's just see. More blue and jagged lines. So it's doing, looks like it's going to kind of build a polygon out of the begin shape and end shape. And let's see. So if I copy this, and yeah, I don't know. Is this a snowflake? Is this more snowflakey than the little wagon wheel thing? I will let you decide. It is more blue and more jagged, so I did get what I asked for. But you can kind of see the some of the limitations of just relying too heavily on the tool. Okay, so that was ChatGPT. Let's see what Bard does. So what did I say here? Give me a p5.js sketch that draws a snowflake. Let's ask the same thing to Bard. Okay, so Bard says here are two examples. All right, well, I only wanted one, but thanks. Looks like this is using the rotate function to probably do something similar. It's drawing a branch. What's draw branch do? Oh, it's recursive maybe? Okay, so recursive function that draws a snowflake. I'm interested to see what this comes up with. So let's run this and see what happens. And okay, that's a little less exciting than I was hoping for, but okay. Let's see, and from here, what I would need to do is like pour over the code, really understand it and make changes to it. And for me, honestly, that would end up taking longer than if I had just sat down with the goal of drawing a snowflake personally. But, I could do it. I'm not going to though. And so it gave me two examples. So here, let's see, what's this do? So this looks like a pretty much the same thing, only with, it said randomness. And yeah, okay, so it's got randomness. So my hopes are not super high here, but let's just give it a chance and see. And all right, that's something. I don't know if I call it a snowflake, but maybe. Just to give Bard a chance, I'll say the same thing I said to ChatGPT. Make it more blue and jagged. Let's just see what it does. All right, so let's just try it. I'm not even going to bother reading it because let's just see. And okay, it is more blue. That's true. It got that part of it. Likely because, in the training data that it learned from or stole, depending on who you are asking, it probably saw things like this call to background that is associated with the word blue. Or probably this call to stroke, RGB. So yeah, this would be more blue. Okay, so I think I've exercised some of the fundamentals of how to use ChatGPT and Bard. There are other things I could do. So for example, I could start with my own code and then say, can you modify this code and add something to it or change it? Again, you would come up against the exact same limitations that you've seen so far, where it'll get some things right, some things wrong, and you really have to pay close attention to what it's doing in order to like actually use it in a useful way. But okay, so I've done sort of the intro. I think now we have our wits about us. So I want to do, I don't know, something pretty similar to what I've done so far, but with the original goal of creating a P5 sketch in the style of Vera Molnar. I have no idea what's going to happen. Could be that they blow me away. Could be that they have no idea what I'm talking about. But let's see. So create a p5.js sketch in the style of Vera Molnar. Okay, so ChatGPT says Vera Molnar is known for her algorithmic and geometric art. That's true. While I can't replicate her unique style exactly, this is a funny thing because these things are used to replicate artist styles all the time. But okay, whatever. I can provide you with a p5.js sketch inspired by geometric patterns and algorithm design. Okay, maybe. I'm actually pretty optimistic about this. Let's copy that code and paste it in and run it. So I'm going to take a look. What's it going to do? It looks like it's got some rotation and it's going to create, looks like this is creating, I want to guess that this is going to be like a weirdly shaped circle, maybe. And it's going to animate over time is my guess. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I can see where it's coming from, I think. I think there are a few things that I would change, and that's, that's something I could do. I could either modify the code directly, or I could go back to ChatGPT and ask it to do something. So I could say something like, I don't know, I could say use squares instead of circles, but I don't know. It's kind of up to us what we want to do. So, I don't love that it's like filling in over time, and that's happening because, and maybe I should stop and say, this is like, I don't know, I'm not trying to make a point, I don't think, but this is the importance of understanding the code. Like, why is it doing what it's doing? Why is it filling in like a circle like that? And I have enough experience with P5 to like know the answer. But if you don't, it becomes really important to spend the time figuring that stuff out. So I don't know. Let's see. If I just go back to ChatGPT and say, can you make it so it doesn't fill the screen with a circle? Okay, so to prevent the sketch from filling the entire screen with a rotating pattern, you can limit the drawing to a smaller area. I don't think this is going to work. I don't think it's going to solve the problem because the underlying problem is that it's not redrawing the background. So that's kind of my opinion here. But let's see what ChatGPT tried to do instead. I think it's going to just make it smaller. And I don't even think it did that actually. So, okay, I don't know if I'm super blown away by that, but, you can kind of imagine that you might use that as a starting point maybe. And I don't know, maybe I'll try to do something like, I don't know, I'll draw the background here. So just make it white, I guess. See what that does. And yeah, so that's more what I would maybe expect. So, I don't know how interesting this is, honestly. It's a rotating weird circle that stops after one rotation, and some of it doesn't really make sense. Like, why? Why does it stop after one rotation? And I don't know if this really lives up to Vera Molnar, but it's something. Okay, so maybe I should say something like, why does the animation stop after one rotation? Like, why did it make that artistic choice? And okay, I included the no loop function in the draw function to stop the animation after one rotation. If you want the animation to continue indefinitely, you can remove the, yeah, okay, fine. So this is just saying you can not stop the animation. It doesn't tell you why. Let's see, like, can I convince it to give me its artistic vision? What was your artistic motivation behind stopping the animation? And okay, here we go. As a machine learning model developed by OpenAI, I don't have personal motivations or artistic preferences. The decision to include no loop in the initial code was not based on artistic motivation, but rather on the assumption that you might want a single rotation for a specific effect or visualization. And then it says, if you want to turn that off, then blah, blah, blah. My responses are generated based on user input and instructions without personal motivations or artistic intent. Do with that what you will. uh, I can't resist but saying without mentioning that this is getting into the idea of like the biases in the training data. So the model has been trained to claim that it does not have any intent or motivations or anything, but the data that it was trained on was written by humans, and those humans did have motivations. They did have artistic intent, and you can extrapolate from there. This gets into huge issues like racism, sexism, all the isms in the content that an LLM is trained on. And, I kind of cringe a little bit when I see things like this because it's a little bit, I think, I don't know, assuaging the responsibility of this LLM because the data itself did have motivations, or the people who created the data. So I don't know. I'll get off my soapbox. Anyway, so next, I don't know. I could do a couple things. I could like try other ways to get ChatGPT to give me something that's a little more interesting. I think instead of that, I'll jump over to Bard. I want to give Bard a chance as well. So let me go back to my exact prompt here and feed that into Bard. See what Bard has to say. Okay, so I get maybe more explanation, which is nice. No code. Let's see. So okay, Vera Molnar's work encompasses several styles, so understanding which specific style you'd like to emulate would help me to provide a more suitable sketch. Okay, this is actually pretty interesting. It's actually asking me to give it more information. So it's saying here's a bunch of different things that Vera Molnar's art sort of included. So if you could let me know which style of Vera Molnar you'd like the p5.js sketch to be inspired by, or even provide a specific work for reference, that's actually pretty interesting. So let's see. So I think geometric series is what I ended up working on. So, or what I ended up being inspired by. So maybe I should find the exact thing I was looking at when I wrote my code. So where is that? Mm, mm, mm. It wasn't this one because it was black and white. Bear with me while I find it. Oh, it's going to be really annoying. Oh, it was this one. Yeah, it was this one. This is the one I was looking at. So let me see. I don't know if it can follow links or anything, but this is what I had on my screen when I coded it myself. So I might come back to this, but let's see. I'm just going to do text here because I think I could give it like a URL or something, but let's see. So give me a sketch that shows, well, I'm not going to get that specific because I want to do that with ChatGPT in a second. I'm just going to say geometric series. I'm just going to give it the answer that it, like in the form that it gave me, whatever. I'm just going to hit enter. Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, so p5.js sketch inspired by Vera Molnar's geometric series, emphasizing nested squares and repeated patterns. Yeah, that's exactly what I ended up going with. So just kind of looking at it, it's more rotation looks like it's going to be involved. So it's got a single loop, and then looks like it's going to rotate. It's going to have squares that are rotated 45 degrees that are bigger and bigger. 10 of them. That's just kind of looking at the code. That's kind of my guess as to what it's going to do. So let's see. And yeah, okay. Each one is rotated 45 degrees from the previous one, I guess. So, okay. That's something. It's interesting. I don't know if it's quite to, the level of complexity that I would maybe look for. But it's actually not the worst thing I've ever seen. That's kind of cool. Um, and then I could do something like, well, let me remind myself what I did with P5. I said, oh, make it doesn't so it doesn't fill the screen. All right. Um, so this is a start, but Bard itself mentioned the idea of a grid. And actually here, you can customize the sketch further by changing the background color, adjusting the scaling factor, adding color variations, modifying the rotation angle, or introducing randomness. Yeah, this is funny. This is pretty close to how I might I might put this at the end of a happy coding example. This is what I usually do. In fact, if I go here and I scroll down, I have like remix ideas. Here's some other things you could do. So you can imagine that the data that Bard was trained on often included things like this, which is not surprising because of the things it was trained on. Anyway, what I want to do is maybe follow up and say, like, can you add a grid of squares? And okay, that's interesting. Like it does look like it does have a grid, has a square function maybe. Oh, this is just the P5 square function. And then for some reason also draws the old one. I don't know. Let's see. Let's just see what it does. Oh, I actually kind of love this because Bard did exactly what I asked it to do, which is so funny. It did add a grid of squares. That's like I can't mark it wrong for that. It definitely added a grid of squares. Um, that's not what I meant. That's not what I wanted it to do. I wanted to add like a grid of these styled squares or whatever you want to call them, patterned squares. Um, but Bard it took me kind of literally here, I guess. And again, you can kind of guess that the reason that this happened is in the training data. There's probably a bunch of posts on various forums and Stack Overflow and Happy Coding that used the terms like grid of squares and then had code that was similar to this. So when I said grid of squares, it like went to its training data, or it went to the model that was built from the training data and came up with this. But there's no necessarily logic. It's not tying this back to Vera Molnar, and it's certainly not getting closer to my goal here. So let me see. So let me go back to ChatGPT, and I'm going to try something. I don't know. I'm going to try a couple things. I want to try just textually to ask it to come up with like the sketch I came up with. So I'm going to say something like, give me a grid of like randomly drawn squares, something like that, which is what I came up with over here, and see if I can prompt it to get closer to what I came up with. The other thing I want to try is feeding it the URL of an image. I honestly don't know if that stuff works in these LLMs, but I'm going to try. So I'm going to try to get it closer to this. So I'm trying to think of the way to do that, which won't like spoil the underlying data. If I prompt it one way and it does something and I prompt it the other way. Let's see. So I think what I'm going to do, I guess I could always just kind of restart my session. So what I'm going to do with ChatGPT is I'm going to say, give me a p5.js sketch that shows a grid where each cell in the grid is a, like, how would you describe this image? Maybe I'll say something like, is a set of randomly drawn squares, I guess. Oh, you can't see it, can you? I'm blocking it. randomly drawn squares. I mean, that's what I would call it as a human. But I don't know. Let's just see. And ooh, maybe. I think this actually might get kind of close. Just kind of glancing at it. Looks like it's going to give 5x5 and like 5x5 grid, and then draw random squares. Draw 5 random squares in each cell. I think this actually is pretty close. I don't think the points in the squares are going to be random because it's just a rectangle, but I'm pretty optimistic about this actually. So let's hit run and see what happens. Yeah, I mean, it's not bad, honestly. It's not there. It needs some changes. It's drawing them all sort of up in the upper left corner instead of filling up the whole width and height. And the squares are generally not super interesting. I don't think. It's my aesthetic opinion anyway. But it is a start, and it is kind of close to what I asked for actually. So from here, I could say something like, make the grid fill the screen, or fill the sketch, just the sketch. So, okay, yeah, I guess make the grid fill the screen. It's making the sketch fill the screen here. And then cell size is still 40, which I think is the real problem. And again, like, not to beat a dead LLM horse or anything, but like, not to, I don't know, brag, I guess. Like, I have enough experience with coding and with P5 to like have a, I don't know, like a spidey sense almost of seeing that these squares don't fill the height of the window or the width of the sketch here. Like it kind of stops it here instead of over here. Like I have a sense of why that is. So I can kind of scroll up and say the reason that's happening is because this cell size is hard coded. Instead of basing it off of the width and height of the canvas, it's just always 60. And so I have enough experience to sort of recognize that. And so again, like I think that sense is still pretty important, even when you're using things like ChatGPT or Bard. So I can kind of glance at the code it's giving me and kind of guess that it's still not going to uh, do what I asked it to. I think it's going to fill the screen with the sketch. So like the screen will be white, but the squares won't fill up the sketch itself. Ooh, the lights just flickered. That's spooky. And okay, maybe I was wrong there. I think that the trick here is that they increased here. They actually did do the logic. Rows and calls is now, instead of making the each row or each cell bigger, which is maybe what I would expect, it just added rows and columns, which is actually fine, I think. And actually, it's maybe a little different than what I would do, which I will say is actually kind of a cool, I don't know, artifact of using these tools is, this is actually a reasonable idea to solve the problem that I probably wouldn't have thought of myself. So instead of growing the cells, it's adding cells, which, fair enough. Um, so, that's kind of cool. I'll give it credit where it's due. That's actually kind of neat. Um, okay, so we're getting, I don't know, closer with ChatGPT. So maybe I could say like, uh, make the sketch 400 by 400 again, and stop filling in the squares. And okay, let's see what that did. So in this case, I asked it to do two things at once, which, I'm kind of just testing out what it does. So let's see. So that's reasonable, I think, actually. I think we could keep going, but this is, I think we're getting to something that is relatively close to a P5 sketch that is um, like inspired by Vera Molnar. Now, it is interesting that, or it's interesting to me, that when I told it to give me a sketch that was inspired by Vera Molnar, I don't think it did very well. But when I sort of had this idea of, can you make a grid of squares? My request was a lot more specific. Then it did, I think, a more reasonable job. So I don't know if there's like a big takeaway there or anything, but that's just something I am observing in my sort of, I don't know, playing around and experimenting here. Um, I want to maybe say that currently, I think there's this, I don't know, big debate around like, is ChatGPT and Bard going to take over the jobs of software engineers? And there's so many different takes on it. But I think currently, the answer is no, because you still do need that human to sort of, I don't know, have its own opinions or have their own opinion. And do the sort of, I don't know, more subjective side of it. So like, what does it mean to create a P5 sketch that is inspired by Vera Molnar? Well, maybe it's a grid of squares, blah, blah, blah. And then once you have that goal, then you can take it over to a tool like an LLM and maybe work with it. Again, lots of stuff I'm not talking about in terms of like ethics, the value of, human work, just kind of the plain old fun of writing code yourself. So again, I personally have lots of mixed feelings that I'm not getting entirely into. Um, but I don't know, just kind of random reflections here. So I think I'm going to keep this around because I think that's actually pretty reasonable for, the end result for ChatGPT. But let's see if I can go over to Bard and kind of do the same thing. Okay, so what was my original prompt over here? It was here. Give me a p5.js sketch that shows a grid where each cell in the grid is a set of randomly drawn squares. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, so this is all in setup, so it looks like it's not going to be animated or anything, but it's going to, it has a grid, so it's got rows and columns, 8 by 8. Okay. And in that grid, it draws random squares, and let's see, it draws a random number of random squares. Where's random squares? Max squares is some parameter, 10, and then it randomly sizes and colors a square. Okay, that's kind of reasonable. Let's see. So I'm going to open up a new editor just because I want to kind of keep that code around instead of finding it later. So let's paste this in. And yeah, maybe. I kind of like this actually. So again, I feel like I'm at the point where I'm kind of repeating myself, but I have some sort of initial reactions, I guess, to this as a human coder or as a human, with experience in P5. When I saw this line of code, I just kind of glanced at it and I was like, oh, okay, it's going to randomly color the squares. And then when I look at it, like, wait, where did my random colored squares go? So then I go back to this and I like look at the code more carefully, which again is really important when you're using these tools. So these tools are not able to really accomplish complex goals by themselves currently. And so you really have to pay attention to them. So like this line of code, shouldn't this, set the fill color? And the answer is no. And you have to sort of understand the ins and outs of the language in order to know what to expect and how to fix it. So I could go back to Bard maybe And so I'll say that from my human brain, the reason that this line of code doesn't work is that it's creating a variable called fill, which first of all, you shouldn't do because there's already a function called fill and that gets kind of messy. But second of all, it creates a variable, but then never does anything with it. So that's why these are all the same exact color or exact same shade. So what I would need to do is call fill with this color, but let's see if Bard can, in quotation marks, figure it out. It's not applying any logic to it. It's always just going to training data, but I shouldn't say going to, it's going to the model that was built on training data. But let's see if it can, let's see if we can get something out of it. So I actually kind of want to be a little annoying to it. I want to sort of give its own code back to it. So if I say like, what does this line of code do? And I paste it in. In fact, let me say line of code in your sketch. What does this line of code in your sketch do? Okay, so here's a breakdown of the code line. So it generates a random light gray color and assigns to the variable fill. The color is then used to fill the squares drawn in the sketch. And this is, kind of interesting because this is wrong. It's getting this wrong here. So the color is then used to fill the squares drawn in the sketch. This step isn't happening in the code. And again, I think, anyway, that it's important to understand why it's getting it wrong. And it's getting it wrong because the way LLMs work is kind of pattern recognition, or you think of it in terms of, or I think of it in terms of the training data. So there was probably lots of posts on forums and Stack Overflow and stuff and Happy Coding that involved questions like, what does this line of code do? And probably whenever you were writing a line of code like this or using a line of code like this, you probably were using it to color something or to fill, set the fill color. So this is kind of leftover from the data that it was trained on, even though it's not actually true for the code that it ended up writing. So this answer is all kind of bogus. But it is interesting that it has been trained to sort of explain itself. So the purpose, by using a random light gray color, the sketch creates subtle variations in the appearance of the squares. Again, no, it doesn't. This adds visual interest and a sense of organic randomness to the overall pattern, and it also aligns with Vera Molnar's artistic style, which often involves exploring randomness and variations within structured geometric forms. So all of those bullet points are, sort of kind of true. But when it's actually talking about the code, it's just flat out wrong here. So I don't know, let me see if I can convince it to, but the squares are all white when I run your code. Okay, so I'm here to help you troubleshoot the issue. That's I will say that again, I'm not getting on my soapbox too much, or maybe I am, but not as much as I could. I'll tell you that. But I am a little bit annoyed by this. I'm here to troubleshoot. I'm here to help you troubleshoot the issue with the squares appearing white. This is, kind of has nothing to do with anything, but this is Bard's fault. And it's like, oh, I'll help you troubleshoot the issue instead of saying like, oh, whoops, my bad. But whatever. So let's see, what is it actually telling me? Let's explore a few potential causes and solutions. 1, background color, check for conflict. That doesn't really make sense. So it's saying if my background color is white, the squares might blend in. Why would that be true if the squares are shades of gray? Yeah, I don't know. Change the background color to a different hue using background in the setup function. Let's see, would that actually do anything? Yeah, maybe. But that's, not the problem here. And then let's see, fill color range, check the range. The code currently generates fill colors between 200 and 255, which might produce very light grays that are hard to distinguish from white. Again, no, that's not what's happening. The whole problem, again, is that this it's never using this. It's creating a color, creating a random shade of gray, but then never using it. So that's the underlying problem. So these solutions are absolutely wrong. Let's see. Stroke color, so check for overlap. If the squares have a white stroke around them, it might create the illusion of white squares, even if the fill is slightly darker. No, the stroke is black, first of all. So I'm not trying to beat up Bard or anything, but I think it's important to sort of, I don't know, keep in mind that Bard does not understand the code. The sort of illusion of the LLM might make you think it does, but this is all based on training data. And now it's definitely getting desperate. It's saying browser compatibility, no. And again, you can maybe imagine that there was probably many posts in various places, I'll just say, where the issue was browser compatibility. But in those cases, it probably made sense for that to be the suggestion. In this case, absolutely not. Code errors, so syntax, yeah, blah, blah, blah. So these are just, things that it has sort of seen in the training data. Doesn't really have anything to do with our code. Okay, adjust background and fill colors, experiment with different backgrounds and fill color combinations. I mean, sort of. So none of this would be helpful, I think, if I didn't already know the solution. In fact, I would probably spend a lot of time on investigating each one of these. And all of that would kind of be, I don't know, wasted time. So I don't know, I'm trying to, I actually think Bard did a pretty reasonable job of coming up with a pattern of random squares in a grid. So, kudos to that. But trying to get it to figure out a problem in its own code is turning out to be pretty hard. So let's see, can I say something like, instead of shades of gray, can you make the squares random colors? Okay, so I was trying to get it to, I don't know, I'm maybe what's it called, personifying it. There's a word that I'm not thinking of. I'm ascribing human sort of traits to it. I'm going to think of that word as soon as I stop recording this video. But I don't know if you can think of the word I'm trying to think of. Put it in the comments. There's your engagement hook. But I was trying to prompt it in a way that was hinting to get it to give me the line of code that I'm looking for, which is to call the fill function. And, swing and a miss here. This will generate a random color. That much is true. But it's still not using the color. Same thing here, same thing here. And yeah, it's, not finding it. So I'm going to just give it to it. I'm going to say why doesn't your code ever call the fill function? Okay, here we go. You're right. The code doesn't explicitly call the fill function. However, it still achieves filled squares in a different way. Let's see. Uh, okay, p5.js is implicit fill behavior. Default fill in p5.js, shapes are automatically filled with the current fill color. I mean, that is true. That's why they're white. So half points for that, I guess. Setting fill color, the line let fill equals blah, 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 sets the fill color for subsequent shapes, even without explicit calling fill. This is a straight up lie. This is not at all how it works. This is incorrect. And again, I don't mean to be preachy in this video. This video is purely I was actually curious what would happen. But this is for the thousandth time, probably, this is why it's so important that you still understand the underlying language, the underlying framework, library. You still have to be in the loop when you're using these tools, because these tools get things very wrong very often. So I don't know if you're a manager out there and you're thinking of replacing your employees with LLMs, don't. Anyway, and let's see. Okay, so drawing squares of fill. The square function used to draw the squares respects the fill color and draws filled squares as a result. Okay, so this is nonsense. However, it does give me this line of code, which is what I kind of need from it. But that's not in the original code, so I do have to still, know how to plug things in. So fill is often used to explicitly set the fill color, but it's not strictly necessary for every shape if you want to keep the current fill. Again, this is true, but never calling fill means that my squares will be white, which is what's happening. So here it is, just kind of repeating the sort of lie that it is telling. And again, I shouldn't personify it like that. There's a word. It's not lying. It's not, there's no malice here, but there's also no understanding. This is all sort of pattern matching from from training data. So I can imagine that this was trained on posts where maybe in a different language or in a different library, maybe this is true. Maybe there is a different library that uses a fill variable instead of a fill function, but in P5, that's just not how it works. So therefore, even without explicitly calling fill, the squares are filled with the intended colors due to p5.js's implicit fill behavior. Again, this is just wrong. So now I'm kind of arguing with Bard, which is maybe a losing battle to get myself into. But like, can I convince it? Again, personifying, it's not convincing anything, but can I get it to a point where my prompts match up with the training data in a way that generates something that works? So I don't know. This is kind of, I don't know. This is a interesting challenge to me. I'm just going to say, like, that's incorrect. Your code needs to call the fill function to set the color of each square. Let's see. Okay, here we go. I love it. Bard is actually arguing with me. Okay, so I appreciate your attention to detail. This comes across as super passive aggressive. All right, so while it's common to use fill explicitly, p5.js has a built-in mechanism that handles filling shapes without always requiring it. No, this part is true. Yes, they will be filled with the current fill color, but the current fill color is white. So setting the fill color in the code, the line, blah, 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 sets the fill color for subsequent shapes. No, it absolutely does not. This is so funny to me. In my, limited experience, ChatGPT will generally like believe stuff you tell it, which leads to its own problems because you can just lie to it and then trick it into doing things. But Bard is coming across anyway, again, sort of anthropomorphizing. That's the word I'm looking for. I'm anthropomorphizing these things, but Bard is coming across as stubborn here, which is pretty hilarious. So it's like insisting that it can just create a fill variable and that magically sets the fill, when in fact it does not. So okay, I think I'm going to stop arguing with Bard because it's like arguing with, I don't know, a toddler. Like, what's my best case scenario here? That I win an argument against a chatbot that doesn't understand a single thing I'm saying? I could be building a snowman right now. So instead, what I'll do is I'll sort of just show what I'm talking about. So instead of creating a fill variable, I am going to call the fill function and I'm going to run this. And ooh, why? color random. Oh, so this is actually funny. I didn't even pick up on this. This actually has two errors. Um, calling color with a single random number. I don't know. Maybe I would actually expect that to work. Um, but I don't know. I'm going to get rid of this color because I think that's messing things up. Again, Spidey sense tells me that that's the thing that's broken, but let's see. Yeah, okay. So maybe I should go back there and say, I didn't even pick up on the fact that this code actually had two errors in it. I've been picking on the single error that it's never calling the fill function. It actually had another error on that exact same line where it's calling color with a random number, which I would actually expect to work, but maybe doesn't. But I'm not going to dig too far into that. But this is the line of code that, like, as a human, I was looking for. This is the line of code I've been trying to convince Bard that it needed to give me. And now here you have the like randomly shaded squares. I couldn't convince Bard to give me them, but as a human, I know enough to change the code that Bard gave me to get the effect that I was going for. So I don't know. Let's compare that to what ChatGPT came up with, and it's going to be slow. So I don't know. I kind of want to try to get Bard to do the same thing. Although I don't know, it's kind of interesting. This grayscale is kind of interesting. So I'm going to go back to, like, can you give the squares random outlines instead of gray fills? Okay, so let's see. So this actually has the exact same problem as before, where it's creating a stroke variable but not calling the stroke function. So I can copy this, but my human Spidey sense kind of already is going off. So if I run this, oh yeah, okay, rows is not defined. So there's actually an even bigger problem where now the code actually doesn't even run because of the changes that it has made has introduced a new problem. So let me just copy this in, see if Bard can fix its own error. When I run that code, I get this error. And again, I feel like it's important to, like, understand how this is working. Like, Bard is not going back to the code and understanding it line by line or anything. It is going to, well, it's going to the model that was trained from training data. So you can imagine that in the training data, there was some combination of, this, like the reference error, rows is not defined, some combination of the things that we've typed above. And like the differences between the code is like in the training data itself. And so, like, that's what's happening. It's not logically fixing errors. It's going back to the training data. So again, my Spidey sense is going off because this does not fix the problem, I don't think. The problem is that this is declared inside of setup instead of at the top, and that does not fix it. So I mean, some of this is true, but, like, it's funny. It's like kind of contradicting itself. So the rows variable was initially used in the draw function to control the grid drawing loops. However, it was accidentally removed from the setup function where it was originally defined. The corrected code ensures that rows is properly defined within the setup function. So, like, again, like, as a human, I can, like, I know that that's wrong. The problem is not that it's not defined in setup. The problem is that it is defined in setup. So, like, let me see. If I go back to the original code, it's all the way back here. This is when I was fighting with it. Good times, Bard. Right. So this was actually just, like, passed in as a parameter. or yeah, rows and columns was used in setup itself, and so now they are used in draw. So the problem is that it moved this code into draw for some reason, probably because that's kind of the kind of code that was found in the trading data, but didn't bring these variables with it. So that's the underlying problem. But as we've seen, it's kind of hard to convince Bard to fix its own errors. So I actually kind of don't know what to do next, because we're getting further away from what I would think is kind of reasonable. So I'm kind of tempted to just say, I think this is as good as Bard is going to get, because otherwise I'm going to have to fight with it again for half an hour, and I've already done that. Okay, so I want to wrap this up. So let me see. So what I want to do, I want to say, okay, so my original goal here was to explore, I don't know, the differences in how a human approaches a certain problem and how ChatGPT approaches it, how Bard approaches it. Again, I'm anthropomorphizing them, but and I just wanted to see like what worked, what didn't work, where are we at? And so my original goal was to take my, hold on, this is going to get meta. My original goal today was to take my original goal from a few days ago, which was to create a P5 sketch in the style of Vera Molnar. I did that as a human, where I came up with this piece of code that draws a grid of kind of random, like kind of scribbly, randomly colored squares. And, I'm pretty happy with this. I think there are a few things I could have done differently, but, overall, I'm pretty happy with it. So I sat down with that same goal, and I worked with ChatGPT to work through the process, and I worked with Bard to work through the process. And I don't know if I have any like revelatory takeaways or anything, but I think first off, there are many, 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 many ethical considerations with these tools, LLMs in general, ML in general, especially how they're used by big tech and by capitalism. And I'm trying not to get too much on my soapbox, but I do think that it's very important to think that through. So I don't know, how do you feel about the fact that these tools were trained on data that was stolen, to put it to not mince words, or the kinds of things, I'll just say, the kinds of realities that these tools can help people create. I'm just going to leave it there. I have really mixed feelings, to say the least. However, with that being said, what I did today was I used these tools to understand kind of their benefits and their limitations. And I think my big takeaway for it is they are useful for certain things. And so, they were reasonable at coming up with syntax that did something that worked okay. And there was, I don't know, there is something to the dynamic of going back and forth with a tool like this. So where I could say like, I don't know, give me, whatever, give me the grid of squares, and then, okay, can you make those a different color? Can you make them bigger? Like having that process, I do think I think there's something to that. I'll give that credit. However, the tools were wrong pretty often. In fact, I would say like every time they gave me code, something was off that I had to, like, as a human, kind of figure out. And again, like, I'm not trying to brag, but like I do have a fair amount of experience in P5, so I think it was relatively easy for me to spot things kind of quickly. But if this was in a language I didn't have more experience in, or in like a new framework or a new library, I personally think that using a tool like this would probably do me more harm than good, because I wouldn't be able to catch things like that. And when something went wrong, it would be really hard to go back to, 100 lines of code that some LLM gave me and find the one thing that was wrong, or maybe it's completely missing and I don't even know where to look for it. So I think for me, I don't know, like going through the motions of writing the code helps me understand the code. And so I think short circuiting that step of it, like, actually hurts me. So I don't know, pros and cons. I will say that there were some, like, I don't know, delightful moments. So when, I don't even remember which one it was, but one of these tools earlier, I want to say it was ChatGPT, but could be wrong, took a different approach, or I should say, surfaced a approach from its training data that I wouldn't have thought of. And that was when it changed the number of rows and columns. It was actually ChatGPT, I remember now, because it was this one. It's actually these two lines of code right here. I would not have thought of that. So that is really interesting. I will immediately caveat that with, I sure do wish I could thank the human who originally came up with that approach. So there is this, I don't know, pros and cons balance with using these tools. But that did unlock something for me that I learned something today by using these tools. So pros and cons, pros and cons. And then finally, I am laughing a lot at how stubborn Bard is. Bard kept getting the same thing wrong and refused to listen to me. Again, anthropomorphizing. So again, pros and cons. If I was trying to use Bard for like an actual project, that would be super frustrating. But in this example, it's mostly funny to me. So again, just stuff to think about. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is maybe just get these up next to each other. I'm going to probably title this video something clickbaity and annoying just because I think it's funny. Like human coder versus ChatGPT versus Bard, Vera Molnar edition or something like that. So I don't know. You be the judge. Who wore it best? This is what I came up with. With just my own self trying to think of something that would be in the style of Vera Molnar. This is mine. Okay, so this was ChatGPT. A little different. And we could have taken this further. Honestly, I could have maybe gone back to ChatGPT and say, like, can you add animation? Can you, blah, blah, blah. Can you make them not like straight squares, make them more like scribbly? Could have, kept going. The same thing is true of my own code, I guess. But this is where I kind of called the ChatGPT project. And then this is Bard. So Bard, and I will say that this is Bard with me helping it with that issue. So actually Bard's original code was just pure white, but whatever. I'm not against helping the competition, I suppose. So this is Bard. So I don't know. What do you prefer? Who wins? Let me know in the comments, I guess. Okay, so I think I'll call it there. I don't know. I sat down with a goal, and I think I achieved that goal. This was relatively interesting for me. Hopefully it was interesting to you as well. From here, you could consider playing with ChatGPT and Bard and other LLMs. I will say I am not encouraging that. Honestly, I'm not sure these tools should be used for all of the ethical reasons that I have sort of, hinted at throughout this video. So I don't know, that's not my takeaway. But if you do use these tools, I think take some of these lessons that I've talked about with you. So make sure you're understanding the code. Make sure that you're sort of, almost suspicious of the output that it gives you, and know that there's no, there's no insane, there's no like very advanced intelligence behind these tools. It's purely pattern matching based on the training data and mixing and matching. And as a result, the output it gives you is often nonsensical. So just, keep that in mind. I don't think these are, the revolutionary future. If you don't use these, you are falling behind the times. Hype machines that other folks are making them out to be, but they are useful in other ways. Caveat all of the ethical considerations. All right, that's a way too much rambling from me. That's way more opinions than I usually give in these videos, but hopefully that was interesting. So if it was, I'd love to hear from you. If you got something out of it, please leave a comment in the comment section on YouTube, or even better than that, let's get off of our reliance on huge tech companies for our human-to-human communication. So if you would like to get in touch, I'd love for you to come to happycoding.io, come to our forum. This is where I hang out. So if you make a post on this forum, I will definitely see it and get back to you. And I would love to hear from you. So don't be a stranger. All right. So I think that's all I came here to do. I'm going to go out and build a snowman or something. So thank you for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, of course, whether you're using an LLM or not, happy coding.